You are no longer my child. You have brought nothing but misfortune to my house. You are a curse, a shadow, a mistake.
In the village square, under the scorching midday sun, a crowd gathered in shocked silence. Elder Kofi, the most respected man in the village, stood with his fists clenched and his face twisted with rage. Before him stood his daughter, Amma, a quiet girl of 17, her eyes cast downward toward the dusty ground. "You are no longer my child," Kofi shouted, his voice echoing off the mud walls. "You have brought nothing but misfortune to my house. You are a curse, a shadow, a mistake." The villagers gasped and whispered among themselves. Amma stood perfectly still by the edge of the river, not crying, not defending herself, not even flinching at her father's cruel words. Her silence was complete, almost unnatural. Kofi pointed toward the forest path. "Leave this house! Leave my sight! I disown you before these witnesses!" The crowd murmured louder now, confused and disturbed. Why would Elder Kofi hate his own daughter so fiercely? Amma accepted her father's punishment without a single tear or word of protest. She simply bowed her head lower, her long dark hair falling forward to hide her face. The villagers expected her to beg, to cry, to defend herself against such public humiliation. But she did nothing. She said nothing. Her silence felt intentional, deliberate, as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Some villagers felt pity stir in their hearts. Others felt suspicion crawl up their spines. "Why doesn't she speak?" one woman whispered nervously. "What kind of daughter accepts such shame without fighting back?" another added. Even those who had known Amma since childhood found her behavior strange and unsettling. She gathered her few belongings into a small cloth bundle, never once looking at her father or the watching crowd. Then, slowly, calmly, she walked toward the river's edge where she had always found peace. Her silence deepened the mystery surrounding her. Years earlier, everything had been different. Elder Kofi had been a warm, loving father who smiled easily and held his family close. His wife Abena was the light of his life, a woman whose laughter filled their home like music. They had been happy once, genuinely happy, living simply but contentedly. Then one terrible night, Abena fell ill with a mysterious fever that no healer could cure. She burned hot as fire, mumbling strange words in her delirium. By morning, she was gone, her body cold and still on their sleeping mat. Kofi had cradled her lifeless form, screaming his grief to the uncaring sky. Something inside him broke that day, something that would never fully heal. The funeral was somber and quick. As they lowered Abena into the earth, Kofi looked across the grave and saw his daughter standing there, dry-eyed and silent. And in that moment, for reasons he couldn't explain, his heart began to harden. After her mother's death, young Amma changed completely. The cheerful child who once sang while fetching water became silent as stone. She stopped speaking except when absolutely necessary, her words becoming rare and precious. The other children noticed first. "Amma doesn't talk anymore," they would say, keeping their distance. But stranger things began to happen around the quiet girl. Animals started lingering near her. Birds would land on her shoulders without fear. Stray dogs followed her home. Even wild deer would approach when she sat in the forest. Most mysteriously, the river itself seemed to respond to her presence. When Amma sat beside the water, the currents would calm to a gentle whisper. The surface would become smooth as glass, reflecting her face like a mirror. Villagers who witnessed this felt uneasy. Kofi noticed everything, and instead of wonder, he felt cold fear creeping into his bones. What had happened to his daughter? Elder Kofi began to convince himself that something was deeply wrong with his child. "She's not natural," he would mutter while sitting alone in the dark. "No normal child behaves this way." Instead of trying to understand her silence or comfort her grief, he started seeing her as something other, something dangerous. Fear disguised itself as authority in his voice. "Stay away from the river," he commanded harshly. "Stop making the animals follow you. People are talking." But Ama couldn't stop what she didn't control. The gift growing inside her was beyond her young understanding. When she tried to obey her father, the animals still came, the river still calmed, and Kofi's fear transformed slowly into something darker and more destructive. He began distancing himself from her, avoiding her eyes, speaking to her only to give orders or criticism. The loving father disappeared completely, replaced by a man consumed by irrational dread. His fear was turning into cruelty. As the years passed, a strange contradiction emerged in Elder Kofi's life. While his heart grew colder and his home darker, his wealth and influence expanded dramatically. His farm produced better harvests than anyone else's, his livestock grew fat and healthy, his opinions carried weight in village matters. People came to him for advice, for mediation, for wisdom. He became the most powerful man in the village, respected and feared in equal measure. But inside his house there was no warmth, no laughter, no love. Ama lived like a ghost in her own home, moving silently through the rooms, cooking and cleaning, but never speaking unless spoken to. The contrast was stark. Outside, Elder Kofi smiled and blessed people. Inside, he barely looked at his daughter. His success became a shield, hiding the decay of his soul. And slowly he began to use his position for something terrible. Every misfortune, every problem, every unexplained event now had a convenient scapegoat.
When the harvest came in smaller than expected one year, Kofi blamed Ama. "You walked through my fields," he accused coldly. "Your shadow touched my crops." When a prized goat fell sick and died, he pointed at his daughter. "You looked that animal yesterday. Your cursed eyes did this." When his favorite tool broke while working, he turned on her with fury. "Nothing good happens when you're near. You bring only misfortune and darkness." Each accusation was absurd, but Kofi's position in the village gave his words weight. Ama never defended herself, never argued, never explained. Her silence made her seem guilty to those who wanted to believe the worst. And slowly, insidiously, the village started believing him. Elder Kofi is wise, they reasoned. If he says his own daughter is cursed, it must be true. The lies became accepted truth. The innocent girl became the village scapegoat. And no one questioned it. The only place Ama found peace was by the river, the ancient waterway that had flowed through the village for countless generations. She would sit on the smooth rocks at the water's edge for hours, her feet dangling in the cool current, her eyes watching the endless flow. The river seemed to listen to her unspoken thoughts, responding to emotions she kept buried deep inside. When she felt sad, the water would ripple gently as if offering comfort. When she felt afraid, it would rush faster as if sharing her anxiety. When she felt the rare moments of peace, it would become perfectly still and clear. The villagers who saw this found it deeply unsettling. "Water doesn't behave like that," they whispered nervously. "It's not natural." But for Ama, the river was the only friend she had left, the only thing in the world that didn't fear her or blame her. It was her sanctuary, her refuge, her silent companion. And the river, ancient and knowing, kept her secrets. As Elder Kofi's accusations continued, rumors spread through the village like poison seeping through soil. "Did you hear about Kofi's daughter?" women would whisper at the market. "They say she's cursed, maybe even a witch." "I heard animals follow her everywhere," another would add nervously, "and the river does strange things when she's near." My grandmother says such children bring bad fortune to everyone around them, an elder contributed ominously. The whispers grew louder, more confident, more cruel. Parents began warning their children to stay away from Amma. Don't play with her, don't talk to her, don't even look at her too long. The children obeyed eagerly, already afraid of the strange, quiet girl. When Amma walked through the village, people would step aside, avoiding her path as if she carried disease. Former friends turned their backs. Market vendors wouldn't meet her eyes. The isolation tightened around her like a rope, cutting her off from every human connection. But still, she remained silent, enduring everything with supernatural patience.
What no one knew, what no one could see, was the truth hidden beneath Amma's silence. Deep within her spirit lived a gift she had never asked for and didn't fully understand. It was an ancient power tied to the land itself, to the river, to the very soul of the earth beneath the village. This gift had been passed down through generations, always choosing someone pure of heart, someone capable of great sacrifice. It demanded things from its bearer: endless patience, complete silence about its nature, and the ability to endure suffering without resentment or hatred. The gift was both blessing and burden, giving her connection to nature while separating her from humanity. Amma couldn't explain it to anyone, even if she wanted to. The words to describe it didn't exist in normal language. So she carried it alone, this tremendous weight, this sacred responsibility. And the gift came with a terrible cost that she was only beginning to understand. While Amma suffered in silence, Elder Kofi's ambition grew without restraint. He began exploiting the land in ways the village had never done before. He cut down sacred trees to expand his fields. He dammed small streams to water only his crops. He overgrazed his animals on common land, caring nothing for the future. "Progress requires sacrifice," he would say when anyone questioned his methods. "The old ways held us back. I'm making us prosperous." And indeed, his wealth grew even larger. But something else was happening, something subtle at first. The soil in the village began to lose its richness, becoming harder and less fertile. The river that had always flowed strong started to lower slowly, its waters less abundant each season. Plants that had grown wild for generations began to wither and die. The land itself seemed to be growing weaker, responding to the greed that was consuming it. But no one connected Kofi's exploitation to the slow decay. They were too dazzled by his success to see the truth. Then came the first omen, impossible to ignore. Fishermen found dozens of dead fish floating in the river one morning, their silver bodies bobbing lifelessly on the surface. The water that had always been clear now carried a strange, murky quality. The earth around the village began to crack, deep fissures opening in the ground like wounds in flesh. Restless winds blew constantly, hot and dry, carrying dust that stung people's eyes and throats. Old women recognized the signs immediately. "The land is angry," they whispered fearfully. "Something is very wrong." But when they brought their concerns to Elder Kofi, he dismissed them harshly. "Superstitious nonsense," he scoffed. "These are natural events, nothing more." Still, unease settled over the village like a heavy blanket. And then the drought began. Rain that should have come didn't fall. The sky remained clear and merciless, day after day, week after week. The drought had arrived, and with it, the village's real test.
Despite the clear signs of disaster, the village refused to look inward. They followed Elder Kofi's lead, desperately seeking someone to blame rather than examining their own actions. "It's the cursed girl," Kofi declared loudly in the village square. "Since she came of age, these problems have grown worse. She's bringing destruction upon us all." The villagers, frightened and looking for simple answers, nodded in agreement. It makes sense, they told each other. Bad things have happened since she became strange. Elder Kofi has warned us for years about her, another added. The collective denial was complete. Rather than questioning why the land was failing, why the river was dying, why nature itself seemed to be withdrawing, they pointed their fingers at the silent girl who had hurt no one. A village meeting was called. Angry voices demanded action. She must be punished, someone shouted. She must be sent away, another agreed. Amma sat in the corner of the gathering, listening to them plan her exile, and still she said nothing in her own defense. The decision was made swiftly and without mercy. Amma was to be cast out from the village, forced to live by the river's edge, cut off from all human shelter and community. You will stay there, Elder Kofi commanded coldly, away from decent people, where your curse can harm no one else. Amma gathered her few possessions, a worn blanket, a clay pot, a small knife. She walked to the riverbank without protest, without tears, without a single word of anger or plea for mercy. Some villagers watched with satisfaction. Others felt vague discomfort, but said nothing. She built a small shelter from branches and leaves beside the water, and there she stayed, completely alone, living on fish and wild plants, sleeping under the stars. The villagers thought her exile would solve their problems, that removing the cursed girl would restore their fortune, but they were terribly wrong. Immediately after Amma's banishment, the drought intensified dramatically. The river dropped even lower. More crops failed completely. The land seemed to be punishing them for their cruelty. On the 7th day after Amma's exile, a mysterious elder woman arrived in the village. She came, walking slowly down the main path, leaning on a twisted wooden staff, her eyes sharp and penetrating despite her apparent age. Her clothes were strange, woven from materials no one recognized, marked with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at directly. She walked through the village, observing everything: the cracked earth, the dying plants, the frightened faces, the dried-up wells. She asked unsettling questions in a voice that commanded honest answers. "Why is the river dying?" she asked one villager. "What have you done to anger the land?" she asked another. "Where is the guardian?" she asked Elder Kofi directly. He blustered and avoided her questions, but something in her gaze made him deeply uncomfortable. The mystic woman moved through the village like she was reading a story written in the dust and stones. Finally, she asked the question that made everyone nervous. "Where is the quiet girl who sits by the river?" The mystic walked to the riverbank and found Amma sitting on the rocks, her feet in the shallow water, her face calm despite her suffering. The old woman sat beside her without asking permission, and for a long time neither spoke. But something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. The mystic could see what others couldn't: the soft glow surrounding Amma, the way the water responded to her presence, the deep connection between the girl and the land itself. "You carry it well," the mystic finally said quietly. "The gift is strong in you, stronger perhaps than it was in your mother." Amma's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion she'd shown in years. The mystic smiled gently. "Yes, child, I knew Abina. I know what you are, what you were born to become." She reached out and touched Amma's hand. "Your silence is not weakness. It is the vow. The gift demands it." Around them, the river began to glow faintly, responding to the truth finally being spoken. The mystic's voice grew softer, more reverent, as she revealed the secrets that had been hidden for so long. "Your mother, Abina, was chosen as this land's guardian before you were born. She carried the gift with grace and strength, protecting the village, ensuring the river flowed and the earth remained fertile." Amma's hands trembled as she listened. When she fell ill, it was not disease that took her. She gave her life to save the land from a great darkness that threatened to consume everything. She performed the final sacrifice, knowing it would mean leaving you behind.
Tears finally came to Amma's eyes, the first she had cried since her mother's death.
"The gift cannot die with its bearer," the mystic continued. "It must pass to another, someone worthy, someone capable of bearing its weight. On the night your mother died, the gift passed to you. That's when everything changed, when the animals began to follow you, when the river began to respond to your emotions." The mystic squeezed Emma's hand gently. "You are the guardian now. You always have been." The mystic explained the terrible price of being a guardian, the cost that Emma had been paying without understanding why. To protect the land, the guardian must endure suffering without resentment. You must face hatred without returning it. You must accept injustice without seeking revenge. The silence is not just custom, it's a sacred vow. Speaking out in your own defense breaks the bond between guardian and land. Emma finally understood why she had never been able to defend herself, why the words always died in her throat when her father accused her, why she had accepted exile without protest. "Every act of cruelty toward you tests your spirit," the mystic continued gravely. "Every time you chose forgiveness over anger, patience over resentment, the land grew stronger through your sacrifice." She paused, her ancient eyes showing deep sadness. "But now comes the final test. The land is dying because of greed and hatred. Only you can restore it, but doing so will require the hardest choice of all." The river around them grew perfectly still, waiting. The final test was approaching. The village reached the breaking point. The river had become little more than a trickle, barely enough water for drinking, none for crops or livestock. The harvest had failed completely, leaving families staring at empty storage buildings. The once fertile soil had turned to dust that blew away with every wind. Animals were dying, children were crying from hunger. Panic spread like wildfire through the desperate community. People gathered in the square, their faces gaunt and terrified, arguing loudly about what to do. "We're going to die here," someone shouted. "We should abandon the village," another suggested. Elder Kofi tried to maintain control, but even his authority was crumbling. His own crops had failed, his own wells were dry. For the first time, he felt genuine fear. Then the mystic appeared in the center of the crowd, her staff striking the ground with a sound like thunder. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice carrying supernatural weight. "I call a gathering. Every soul in this village will attend. Tonight, at the river, the truth will finally be revealed." That evening, the entire village assembled by the dying river, torches flickering in the darkness. The mystic stood before them, Emma silent at her side. "You have asked why the land is dying," the mystic began, her voice carrying to every ear. "You have blamed this innocent girl, calling her cursed, driving her away. But you are the cursed ones, blinded by your own fear and greed." She pointed at Elder Kofi. "This man has exploited the land without respect, taking more than his share, destroying what should be protected. And when the land began to fail, he blamed his daughter to hide his own guilt." The crowd murmured in shock. "This girl you call cursed is actually your guardian, blessed with an ancient gift passed from her mother. She is bonded to the land itself, suffering in silence to protect you all. Every cruelty you showed her, she absorbed without resentment. Every accusation she endured without hatred." The mystic's eyes blazed. "And now you will see the truth of what you've done."
Elder Kofi's face drained of all color as the mystic's words struck him like physical blows. Memories flooded back, his wife's final words that he'd been too grief-stricken to understand. The strange glow around Abina before she died, the way the land had flourished under her gentle care. "No," he whispered, his legs weakening beneath him. "What have I done?" The mystic showed no mercy. Your greed weakened the land. Your hatred poisoned the river. Your pride blinded you to the truth that your own daughter was protecting you all this time. She turned to the crowd. "And all of you who followed his lies, who shunned an innocent girl, who chose comfortable blame over difficult truth, you are equally guilty." Elder Kofi fell to his knees, the weight of his crimes crushing him. All his wealth, all his power, all his influence meant nothing now. He had destroyed the one thing that mattered, the bond between guardian and land. He had hated and abused his own daughter, while she silently saved him again and again. His pride had brought them all to the edge of destruction.
For the first time in years, Amma spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying across the water like a bell. "Father," she said simply, and Kofi looked up with tears streaming down his face. "I forgive you." The words were not angry or triumphant. They held no resentment, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. They were pure compassion, the final and greatest test of her guardian spirit. "I forgive all of you," she continued, looking at the villagers who had tormented her. "You were afraid, you didn't understand, but fear is not stronger than love, and ignorance is not stronger than truth." She stepped toward the dying river, and as she did, something miraculous began to happen. The water responded to her voice, to her words of forgiveness, to the completion of her trial. The river began to glow with soft golden light, growing brighter with each step she took. "The land does not demand punishment," Amma said gently. "It asks only for respect, for balance, for harmony. Give it that, and it will give you life in return." The river surged suddenly, powerfully, water rushing up from deep underground sources that had been sealed by the collective guilt and greed of the village. The dry riverbed filled rapidly, the water glowing with that same golden light that surrounded Amma. The current grew stronger, wider, rushing past the village with renewed force and purpose. As the water flowed, it revealed things that had been hidden. Washed up on the banks were stolen items that villagers had blamed on others. The current exposed the sacred stones that Kofi had buried when expanding his fields. The truth came pouring out with the water, undeniable and cleansing. Crops that had been dead began to green again, drawing life from the restored river. The cracked earth sealed itself, becoming soft and fertile once more. The oppressive heat broke, and cool winds began to blow. The land was healing, responding to Amma's forgiveness and the breaking of the curse created by hatred and lies. The village's fate hung in balance, waiting for their response.
Justice came, but not in the form anyone expected. Elder Kofi lost everything: his position of authority, his reputation, his wealth. The village stripped him of his title, recognizing that true wisdom had been with his daughter all along. But Amma refused to let them punish him further. "He has learned," she said quietly. "That is enough." Kofi spent his remaining days in humble service, working the land with his own hands, speaking to no one unless spoken to, living the exile he had forced upon his daughter. But in that humility, he finally found the peace that had eluded him for years. The village repented collectively, changing their ways, respecting the land, sharing resources, honoring the balance between taking and giving. They built a small shrine by the river, not to worship Amma, but to remember their mistakes and the cost of their cruelty.
Children were taught the true story, learning about guardians and gifts, about seeing beyond fear to truth. The transformation was real and lasting, born from genuine remorse and hard-won wisdom. Amma remained by the river as its eternal guardian, living simply in a small dwelling built with respect and care by grateful villagers. She was not praised loudly or celebrated with festivals. She didn't want that. She remained quiet, gentle, nearly invisible to those who didn't know how to see. But those who understood knew the truth. She was essential, the living bridge between the people and the land that sustained them. The river flowed strong and clear. The crops grew abundant. The animals thrived. All because the guardian watched over them, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply being what she was born to be. Sometimes, late at night, villagers would see her sitting by the water, her feet in the current, the river glowing softly around her, and they would remember the lesson that came at such terrible cost. The mystic's final words echoed through generations. How often do we punish the innocent simply because we fear what we don't understand? The question remained, haunting and necessary, a reminder that would never fade.